Hi guys, Sean here from digiDirect. Today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new Panasonic S5, which is a full-frame mirrorless camera packaged into a small body. Now I am shooting this video on the S5 right now, and I'm using the eye autofocus tracking to track me right here. Now we'll touch on all the features here. If you'd like to jump to a certain part of the video, check the video description below there. And as always, if you find the video helpful, please like and subscribe. Now without any further ado, let's jump in and take a look at the body of the S5. So the small size of this camera is obviously a major point in favor of the S5. Body only, it's only 714 grams compared to the 1,020 grams of the S1. And it's a fair bit more compact as well. The S5 doesn't feel too small though. I like the grip and I like the ergonomics here. They still are very comfortable. Also not lost in that smaller body size is the build and the general styling of the camera. This is a very high quality build. It's got a lot of good controls and buttons. Overall, it feels like an S1, just smaller. It's a fully weather-sealed camera as well, which is great. There's a fully articulating touchscreen, and it does inherit the strong touchscreen functionality and the intuitive menus that Panasonic has had for quite some time now, so it's quite an easy camera to use. Differences to the S1 is that the EVF here on the S5 is 2.6 million dots, which is actually not that high these days. The S1 is 5.7 million, and even the 3-year-old GH5 is 3.6 million dots, so this is below the curve. That being said though, to my eyes, it was mostly fine. I don't really have any complaints. The S5 has dual SD card slots, one of which, not both, is UHS-II compatible. Now note, you can shoot all the video features with just a UHS-I card though, so that's mostly not a problem. There's also a mic and headphone jack, USB-C, and a micro HDMI port, rather than the full-size HDMI port that we saw on the S1. The S5 also has a new battery, the BLK22, that has even better performance by about 15% than the legendary GH5 battery. And it can also be charged in camera, including while the camera is in use, which is nice. Also releasing with the S5 is a new 20 to 60mm f3.5 to 5.6 lens. It covers a useful zoom range, it fits and balances well on the small S5 body, and it's very affordable when purchased with the camera. I think it makes a good kit lens. It's what I use to shoot most of the photos in this video. I also use a Sigma 45mm for some of them, but it's a good option for sure. Overall, I really like the body on the S5 here. The camera feels great. There are a few small sacrifices compared to the S1. You've got that lower EVF resolution and the HDMI port size, but for the most part, the build is very comparable, and personally, I quite prefer the reduced size. So the S5 has the same 24 megapixel sensor inside of it as the S1. It's a very solid, well-performing, mid-resolution, full-frame sensor. The pictures coming out of this camera are quite nice. I do find that Panasonic cameras are often overlooked for stills just by virtue of the fact that they overperform so much in video. Everyone's always looking at the video side of things. But don't discount this camera for its stills performance. It's a very good stills shooter. You've got a lot of nice features in here as well for stills shooting. We've got high-res mode, which is where the camera is going to take a series of images and combine them together to give you a single 96 megapixel shot. This is now available also in RAW and JPEG. And they've also got live composite mode. This is a mode that lets you build up your exposure over multiple shots. It's very useful for low light or long exposure shooting. And speaking of low light as well, we've got good low light performance on the camera here as well. So a very good suite of strong image quality and nice stills shooting features as well. Just a quick note about burst shooting. When you're shooting with continuous autofocus, the camera maxes out at 5 frames per second for burst shooting. Now, if you're not using continuous autofocus, that does increase to 7 frames per second. So it's not incredibly speedy for burst still shooting compared to a lot of other cameras on the market. It does have 6K photo, so you can get 18 megapixel shots at 30 frames per second using that. Panasonic's excellent in-body image stabilization system is here on the S5. I'm very happy about that. This is one of the better in-body image stabilization systems on the market, one of the best, in fact. I like it a lot better, for example, than Sony's system on the A7S Mark III, which is one of the main competitors of this camera. You can see here I'm shooting at 20mm, completely handheld, just walking with the camera. That's very steady. And then, of course, if you're shooting at a slow motion 4K 60, for example, that's going to smooth that out even further. So you really have a reduced need for fancy gimbals and so on. You can get a lot of really good shots just completely handheld. All right, well, let's break up the discussion of autofocus performance into two different parts, video and stills. We'll start with stills. And Panasonic's depth from defocus DFD system has always been very effective at single point AF. It does a very good job here. It's quick to recognize subjects. It identifies bodies, faces, and eyes of people and of animals as well. I think it does a very, very good job. You do see some of that hunting in the background. That is just an artifact of how the DFD system works. But the photos themselves always come out in very sharp focus, so that's not too much of a problem. It's just something you have to get used to a little bit. So I'm very happy with the performance of the autofocus system here in stills. I think you will be as well. Now looking at video autofocus, the S5 has received improvements here. This is better than the S1, S1H. Specifically, it has improvements to face recognition, subject tracking, and dealing with small subjects. Now, these improvements are most noticeable in 4K 60, where the higher frame rate allows for better performance. At 4K 60, I'm pretty happy with the video AF performance here. It does a good job at tracking subjects and changes focus relatively quickly. If you shoot regularly in 4K 60, I think you'll be sitting pretty. However, it's not all roses, and the camera does have hiccups when we bring it down to 4K 24. At this slower shooting speed, it's not as responsive, and although it is improved over previous versions, it is still behind the competition, notably Canon and Sony, and this is kind of where Panasonic has always sat for video AF. At 4K 24, it can be noticeably slow. It can take a second or two to adjust to changing focus conditions. It can hunt, and it's just generally not quite as reliable. That's not to say it can't be used. I shot this whole review video using continuous AF with face detect in 4K 24, and the results are obviously usable. So it's not crap in 4K 24, but you do see a noticeable performance drop, and it is still lacking relative to the competition. In 4K 60, though, as mentioned, I'm happy with the performance. Note you will get a better performance if you shoot in a more contrasty picture profile versus a flat picture profile. So now let's look at video features, where, as always, Panasonic really impresses. So the S5 can shoot 4K video at up to 60 frames per second, and you can do this with 10-bit internal recording as well, which is awesome. This is really beautiful footage. I love 4K slow-mo. It looks fantastic, and with that 10-bit color as well. You can also shoot at 1080p at up to 180 frames per second. Now for most shooting modes, there's no crop. You do have an APS-C 1.5 times crop in 4K 60. And also for most shooting modes, you're going to have no record limit, although if you are shooting anything with 10-bit, or 4K 60, you're going to have a 30-minute record limit. Furthermore, the camera has Vlog built in, which is otherwise a $200 purchase. This allows you to shoot at a very low contrast picture profile, which is great for color grading and gives you access to over 14 stops of dynamic range. The camera also has a great range of video tools and usability features that just makes it very easy to shoot high quality video, stuff that we rarely see in the competition, stuff like punch and focus, anamorphic modes, dual zebras, the ability to use custom LUTs, waveforms, built-in time-lapse, and so on. I also experienced no overheating issues with the S5. Those 30-minute record limits in certain modes are to prevent overheating, but in my experience, once you hit the 30 minutes, you just hit record again, and it just keeps going. So that's a notable factor considering the Canon EOS R5 does have some significant overheating problems. Rolling shutter is pretty well controlled, and you'll see an improvement to that again when you shoot in 4K 60. We're also going to get a firmware update by the end of the year that's going to give a number of S1H features to the S5, such as Cinema 4K, 5.9K, and raw video output via HDMI, vector scopes, shutter angle, and more. Now, these are market-leading video specs. The cameras that I've been making comparisons to here are the Sony a7S III and the Canon EOS R5. Those are both cameras that cost twice the price of the S5 here. So in terms of value for money for video performance, this is unparalleled. The Panasonic is absolutely still the king of video features here on the S5. Overall, the Panasonic S5 hits almost every note with the exception of that video AF. If they could get the video autofocus performance of, say, the Sony a7 III in this camera, I would call it almost a perfect camera. Ultimately, though, if you can get over that or work around it, then you've got a camera here that's a full-frame camera that's compact, a lot of great ergonomic features on here, very strong stills performance, and a nice suite of stills features. You've got exceptional video performance. You've got one of the best in-body image stabilization systems on the market, all in a camera that costs, like I said, about half of some of its closest competitors in terms of specs and so on. So if you're a hybrid shooter or a video shooter, who can deal with that, not having the best AF on the market, I would highly recommend this camera for that kind of situation. Now, you can order the S5 on our website at www.digidirect.com.au, or you can come in store and check it out for yourself. We've got stores in the Sydney CBD, Bondi Junction, Miranda, the Brisbane and Melbourne CBD, and Cannington, Western Australia, which is just outside the Perth CBD. Thanks, guys. Take care.